Hi folks, my name is Nat, aka Neurodivergent Nat, and I create educational videos about autism, ADHD and living with chronic health conditions such as hypermobility, Ehlers-Danlos and POTS, which is a type of dysautonomia. I have a psychology degree, a postgraduate certificate in autism studies, and currently studying a postgrad certificate of mental health. So today I'd like to talk about something that I have actually lived with and experienced my whole life, and I've only recently found out there's actually a name for it. I've never liked feeling criticized or judged. I've never liked conflict, especially in personal relationships, and in fact I would go so far as to say I actually try and avoid it like the plague. I'll do or say anything to avoid getting into an argument or conflict because the fear of being criticized feels like such a personal attack. I just feel like I've been wounded. I just feel like pain all over my body. So what am I actually referring to? Rejection Sensitivity Dysphoria, or RSD. So Rejection Sensitivity Dysphoria, I'm just going to call it RSD from now, is a condition that's characterized by intense emotional pain or distress in response to real or perceived rejection, criticism, or failure. So it can involve feelings of shame, embarrassment, anger, or really deep sadness, even when the rejection or criticism is minor or unintentional. So when it comes to ADHD, RSD is actually really common in the ADHD population, but it's quite often overlooked as a co-occurring issue. So it's actually important to note that RSD is not officially recognized as a diagnosis in itself, but rather if you view it as a framework that can help you understand what you might be experiencing is actually RSD and what you can do or loved ones to actually help support you when you are feeling like you've been triggered by RSD. Okay, so why are people with ADHD more prone to experiencing RSD? So there's a few things. Emotional regulation difficulties. So ADHD is often associated with difficulties in regulating emotions. So individuals may have a heightened emotional response to situations, making them feel more sensitive to criticism or perceived rejection. Impulsivity and self-esteem. So people with ADHD often struggle with impulsivity and can act or speak without thinking, and that can often lead to social challenges. So the flow-on effect from that is that it can damage your self-esteem. You can have more low self-esteem, and in that kind of create more stronger emotional reactions, especially when you feel rejected or criticized. Also, negative feedback throughout childhood and growing up. So many people with ADHD receive more frequent criticism in their lives due to symptoms like inattention, impulsivity, or hyperactivity, especially during childhood. So this constant exposure to negative feedback can then make you more sensitive to any form of perceived rejection later in life. And it can also contribute to internalized ableism. And that's the thinking of why can't I behave like that, or why can't I react like that because other people do? Which then you can spiral into feelings of shame because you're feeling different. Another reason is perception of social situations. So individuals with ADHD are more likely to misinterpret social cues or perceive situations more negatively than they're intended. So for example, you might feel rejection or rejected even when rejection hasn't actually occurred. So we might perceive it, and our brains can be more sensitive. And another reason is neurological difference. So our nervous systems in neurodivergent people tend to be more sensitive to the environment, including stress. So symptoms of RSD in ADHD, or how we might respond, include things like intense emotional reactions to perceived criticism or failure. So for example, feelings of devastation, anger, or humiliation. Avoidance of social situations due to fear of rejection or criticism. Self-criticism and excessive guilt over mistakes that we've made. Overreaction to minor setbacks. So like feeling like a failure after something's happened. It's like a small error. And also difficulty bouncing back from rejection or criticism, leading to prolonged distress. So now let's go into more details about how RSD symptoms, and what it feels like when your RSD is triggered. So I mentioned intense emotional reactions. So overwhelming sadness, hurt, or shame. So a person that experiences RSD can feel deeply devastated by what they perceive as rejection, even if it's a minor or unintentional slight. Anger or irritability, a strong emotional reaction, often in the form of anger, can emerge when someone feels criticized or rejected. And I know personally that I can go from like 0 to 100 with my emotions if I am triggered, like if my RSD is triggered, and I might perceive it as being rejected even though it might not actually be a rejection, it's just how I've perceived it. Embarrassment or humiliation. So the emotional response to perceived rejection can be so intense that the person feels humiliated or like even exposed, even in situations where others may not notice or care. Number 2 is feelings of abandonment. So the fear of being abandoned. People with RSD may have an irrational fear of being rejected or abandoned, which can lead them to misinterpret social interactions. Feeling unloved or unwanted, so even small actions like a lack of attention or a brief delay in a response can lead us to feel like we're not loved or we're unimportant. Number 3 is self-criticism and low self-worth, so an excessive self-blame. So after experiencing perceived rejection or failure, individuals may engage in harsh self-criticism, blaming themselves excessively, and that is definitely something I have experienced. I growing up have very much been like a people pleaser. I've lived with perfectionism my whole life, so the pressure that I can put on myself and blame myself can be really intense. This is also associated with loss of self-esteem, so quite often self-worth kind of takes a big hit after you're being criticised or rejected, and then of course you feel like worthless. Negative self-talk, so thoughts like I'm not good enough or I'll never be accepted, can really play on our minds, and it can become quite pervasive. So quite often we might ruminate on this negative self-talk that then may spiral into low mood or depression. So I think it's really important if you or a loved one experience these symptoms and things that I'm talking about, just to kind of be curious and do some more research into RSD. So number 4 is social withdrawal or avoidance. So avoidance of social situations. So basically to prevent the pain of rejection happening again. Quite often individuals with RSD may avoid social gatherings, group activities, or situations where they might feel criticised. Isolation, so they may isolate themselves to avoid the perceived risk of emotional hurt. Number 5, difficulty recovering from rejection, so the prolonged emotional pain after experiencing perceived rejection. An individual with RSD may struggle to move past it. This can last, hours or days. The emotional pain can linger for quite a while. And the inability to let go of negative experiences. So even like the smallest criticism or rejection or misunderstanding can haunt us, and we kind of then ruminate on what happened, and we just replay it over and over in our mind. Number 6, physical symptoms. So physical distress. The emotional pain of RSD can sometimes manifest itself physically. So you might feel nauseous, experience headaches, an increased heart rate during or after rejection, and also tightness or tension in the body. And that can quite often be related to stress. So, a lot of muscle tension. Number 7, impulsivity and hyperactivity in response to RSD. So overreaction or impulsive behaviour. When you feel rejected or criticised, you may react impulsively, like you might lash out or become defensive, which, yes, guilty of here. And quite often you might say things without actually thinking through like what the consequences would be. And also emotional outbursts. Again, yes, me, 0 to 100 with my emotions really quickly in response to perceived or real criticism or rejection. And often we might cry, or we might yell, or seem to kind of like react really dramatically. That might seem like out of proportion to the situation. Number 8, hypervigilance and sensitivity to criticism. So a hyper-awareness of social cues. Individuals with RSD may be highly attuned to the social interactions, seems like nitpicking or scrutinizing like every word, kind of like hyper-focusing on anything that could be perceived as like criticism or rejection. So even like the slightest thing. Number 9 is perfectionism and fear of failure. So this is like a huge one for me, and I also live with anxiety. So the anxiety around like potential rejection or criticism, sometimes like it might kind of stop me in my tracks, and quite often people that experience this might also like avoid new tasks, or like push themselves to perfection in an attempt to kind of avoid failure. And also the inability to tolerate mistakes. So the smallest mistakes or setbacks may feel catastrophic, leading to excessive stress or avoidance behaviours. So the most important thing I'd like you to understand with all of this and to really think about is know your triggers. So understanding your triggers can help you to stay calmer in times of stress. So something to get you thinking about is some triggers of RSD might include real or perceived withdrawal of love or approval or respect, teasing or bullying, criticism, and this actually includes constructive criticism. So criticism as in like being told that you're weird or different, especially as a child. If you consider that when you're growing up and you constantly get told that, that's obviously going to play on your mind and you're going to start to internalize all of this. Or like as an adolescent or an adult at work or school. So for example, like you might receive a grade, and this has happened to me, on assignments, and being told, constructive criticism like, oh, you could have done this, or maybe do this next time. But boom, that can trigger my RSD, which can be really difficult because going through and doing my psychology degree when I was, in my early 30s, and it took me like 10 years to complete, I had a lot of assignments and a lot of times when it was really hard to even read the feedback because I didn't know back then, but that was RSD being triggered constantly. So that persistent self-criticism or negative self-talk is also can be a trigger, and that can be prompted by like a real or perceived failure. Social interactions, so it could even be like comments from friends or family or work colleagues, even if it's just like a neutral or constructive criticism can trigger your RSD. Also consider maybe relationship dynamics. So if, for example, your partner forgets a date, like a special date, an anniversary, for example, or not paying enough attention, can be perceived as like emotional rejection. That can trigger your RSD. Self-comparison, so comparing yourself to others and feeling inadequate or not good enough can trigger your RSD. So if you got to this point and you're thinking like, well, hold on, doesn't everyone kind of experience RSD? A bit like when people say, doesn't everyone experience ADHD? Like, no, not necessarily, because what makes RSD different from normal emotional reactions is the intensity and the duration. So while most people feel upset when they're rejected or criticized, if you live with RSD, you experience these emotions in an overwhelming and enduring way that often doesn't kind of match the situation's severity. Excessive focus on the negative, so individuals with RSD are likely to ruminate over negative events and perceive them in the worst possible way, sometimes amplifying the significance of minor, criticism or rejection. And also disproportionate distress. So the pain from the rejection or criticism can feel like an emotional crisis, even for small or unintended remarks. And this can change your whole day. The pain, and again, I've experienced this, it just feels like you've been wounded. It is like total body pain for me. It's like I just want to crawl up in a hole. So from this point, I want you to know that there are strategies and there are things that can help you. So first of all, the fact that you're watching this video tells me that maybe something's happened in your life, or you know someone that has kind of, never liked criticism or rejection. So hopefully this has been a bit of a light bulb moment for you. So managing RSD when you also live with ADHD can involve a combination of strategies. So in terms of therapy, as a neurodivergent person, I would tend to look at DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy. That can be helpful with emotional regulation. Some medication for ADHD. So you've got stimulants, you've got non-stimulants. I would consider the non-stimulants like guanfacine or clonidine. But if you do, be sure to discuss this with your psychiatrist, as I'm not a medical professional. Mindfulness and emotional regulation skills may help. So learning techniques on how to manage your emotions, especially the intensity from, like I said, 0 to 100, like really quickly. Mindfulness can help with that, and it's about staying in the present moment. That can be beneficial. Also, supportive relationships, so encouragement and understanding from friends, family, colleagues can provide reassurance and reduce the feelings of isolation, like related to RSD. So, for example, if you're in a relationship, I encourage you to discuss RSD with your partner, including what your triggers may be. And I found this really beneficial in my life as well. And also by naming it. So, for example, I will now say like, oh, my RSD has been triggered, and actually just helping to like name it and externalize the RSD. So it's kind of taking it away from me, like me being the problem. So supportive relationships, really important, and keep that communication open. Journaling or art therapy sometimes can give you insight into yourself and your triggers. Self-compassion, placing a hand on your heart and repeating positive affirmations can be helpful. And also remembering to be kind on yourself. That is what self-compassion is all about. Acknowledging that you are not alone. Many neurodivergent people also experience RSD. Emotional regulation activities such as grounding techniques can help calm our mind and our body. For example, there's the 5 senses activity that uses all your 5 senses, name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, and so on. Name it to tame it, which I just mentioned. So this is a term coined by Dr. Daniel Siegel, who's a psychiatrist and an author. And naming it, so actually saying like, oh, I think I've been triggered, my RSD is triggered, is extremely powerful, because when we name something, we're actually putting it outside of ourselves. So you're kind of creating a distance between you and your reaction, which makes it easier to stop blaming and shaming ourselves. So it can help us to switch from like a dysregulated state to a more regulated state. So I just want to give you some insight, like when we are emotionally dysregulated, the limbic part of our brain is activated. So in particular, the amygdala. So this is when we're in a more fight or flight activated state. So this has a flow-on effect because it can also lead to catastrophizing and ruminating on those thoughts. So on the flip side, a positive coping mechanism can be to name it. As I've given an example, I think I'm experiencing an RSD trigger. Even just saying those words can help to reactivate our prefrontal cortex. So the front part of the brain that's helpful with connection, problem solving, and reasoning. So that's the end of the video. I hope it has helped. I hope many of you are watching this and thinking, oh my gosh, now I know what I'm experiencing. It took me 48 years to realize what I've been experiencing my whole life is RSD. And also, if you are a loved one or a work colleague and you're thinking that someone also lives with RSD, please share the video. And if you would like more information on the work that I do with neurodivergent clients, please visit my website. I'll pop that in the link in the description below. And I want to say thank you. And remember, if you experience RSD like myself, please know that you are not alone, and I'd love your feedback. Thank you. Bye for now.